Greetings, I'm Patrick Worthy from Friday Game Studios, and today I'm going to take you with me on a journey. We're going to be creating a Dungeons and Dragons like game, at least the rules. But, you know, it takes a long time to make a game, so today we're just going to start with the basics. And no prior experience required. That being said, nothing will be held back. So I'll be showing you the best practices I know while we make this game. Okay, so step 1, you need to download and install Visual Studio. You need Monogame, and we're also going to use some source control as well. If you're already a programmer, you will have likely used source control software. But if not, then you should also install Git for Windows, and my favorite way to use Git, which is Tortoise. All of the links will be provided in the description. And I assume you're computer savvy enough to install software. I mean, you are watching this video on YouTube, so... Okay, so let's jump straight to it. So, first thing you want to do is go to github.com. Now, github.com is... well, yours will look different from mine because I have an account on GitHub. But github.com is essentially a service for you to use where you can stash all of your code on. And it allows you to do things like look through the history of your code, allows you to undo entire changes that you made to your code. It allows you to work with team members, so if you have a buddy that is also learning how to program or maybe already knows how to program, then you can get them to work with you using the same project, and you can both contribute to it and get each other's changes that way. GitHub is pretty popular. There's other types of source control out there, like Perforce or SVN, but we're going to use Git with GitHub. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to create an account on GitHub. Once you have an account, you can head on over to your profile, go to repositories. Yours will probably be blank. I've got some stuff here. Then you'll want to click on the new button. And this will create a new spot for you to dump your files, pretty much. So the repository name, mine is just gonna be Dungeon Crawl. You can name it whatever you want. You can add a description if you want. I'm gonna leave that alone for now. If you're a student, you can get access to private repositories, but I'm not gonna go into detail how you do that. I'm gonna make mine public though. Oh, you can also get private repositories if you want to pay them for it. But yeah. Okay, initialize this repository with a README. It's always a nice thing to do. It essentially just puts a README file in your repository, which you can give people instructions that are using your repository. add git ignore. This is actually really important. So git ignore is for not putting some files on the repository. So when you create a project in Visual Studio, there are some sort of temporary files that it puts in your project folders and stuff, and it doesn't really make sense to put those files on the GitHub servers. So you don't actually want to upload those files at all. So the way they get around this is they create a file called a .gitignore file. It's essentially just a text file that basically states what files not to put on the server. Luckily, this has already been done for you. So if you just type in Visual Studio, you'll see Visual Studio will just pop up, and that's all you have to do. License, this is optional, but I'm gonna do a Creative Commons 0 license because I'm actually gonna put this up so you guys can grab it and do whatever you want with it. You just can't do things like stamp Friday Game Studios on stuff, because that's my trademark, not yours. Okay, so once you have these things done, you just click this big welcoming green button. Bam. Okay, and so it put the license on there, it put the gitignore on there, and it put the readme, which is basically blank at the moment, just says dungeon crawl. So if you wanted to edit this, you could. There it is. Yeah, so you hit edit this file, and then you could say, here's how to use my repo, blah blah blah. Yay, save changes. But in order to save or commit those changes, you have to give it a commit message. And update readme.md is just fine. So I'm just going to say this is an example update of the readme. And you don't have to put anything there at all. So commit. And now when I head back to the repository, it says all that stuff. So new people coming to your repository will be able to see all this stuff, especially if it's public. Okay. So next thing you want to do with all the software you just installed, you want to open up your Windows Explorer, head to where you want to create your stuff, because now you're going to put all this on your computer. So Tortoise Git allows you to just use the context menus in Windows Explorer. So if I just right click, hey look. So because we already created a repository on the GitHub server, what we want to do is clone it from the server. So if you say git clone, now we have to copy this link here. This link, not this one, okay? And paste it in the URL spot. and say OK. And we wait for this to finish, and it says success. Cool. So now if we look in here, we've got the .git ignore, we've got the license, we've got the README, and we've got a hidden folder, .git, which just stores information. You don't really have to worry about it. Cool. So now what we want to do is open up our Visual Studio. Create a new project. A Monogame Windows project. And we find where our repo is, our repository, and we select that folder. And we hit OK. Wait for Visual Studio to do its thing. Okay, I'm going to turn off Visual Assist, which you wouldn't have, so don't worry about that. Okay, so if you pop on over to your Solution Explorer, there's a file in there called game1.cs, which stands for C#. So if you double click on that file, then bam, there's code. If you're new to programming, this will all be pretty much alien to you. But I assure you it does something. So if you click on this little green start button, or you could press F5 if you're a hotkey junkie, or you could go up to the debug menu and start debugging from there. If you do any of that, then it'll say build started, and then subsequently say build succeeded, and bam, you get this sort of empty blue window which shows that it works. And if you want to stop, you can either click the stop debugging button, use Shift F5, or you could exit out of this window, or I believe you can also use the escape key. Okay, so now that the project is created, I'd say it's time to make a commit on GitHub. So the way you do it with Tortoise is you just right click here in your repository and you say git commit master, and make sure all of these are checked. So I'm going to click the top one, then hold shift, click the bottom one, and then click in one of the check boxes so that they're all checked. And you have to give it a commit message. So I'm going to say this is the initial commit, and click. Actually, you want to commit and push, and then you're going to have to put your username and password that you created for GitHub. And success. So on GitHub, if you refresh the page, should now have your Dungeon Crawl project folder with your solution in it, with game1.cs and all the rest of the stuff. But if you were to go through, you would notice that it is missing some stuff. And the reason it's missing the things like the binary files in there is because of the git ignore. So some of that stuff you don't want to upload, like the binaries and the temporary files that go with Visual Studio. So yeah, if we click on this 3 commits thing here in GitHub, we can see all of the commits we made. So the initial commit was actually GitHub's commit when we created the repository. Then we had the update readme commit, and then we've got the one we just made, which is this is the initial commit, which I know there was already an initial commit, but whatever. It's just to tell you or people looking at your repository what each of these were, pretty much. And you can even go in and see what changed. And it's a pretty handy tool. It's like Dropbox or Google Drive on steroids. Okay. So, now that we have our game, what we want to do is change it up. And let's just do something simple. So, at the bottom of game1.cs, there's a function called draw. It says draw. And it says this is called when the game should draw itself. Neat. So, this line that says graphics.clear and then color.cornflowerblue, this is telling the game to clear the screen to a cornflower blue color. So you can actually change this. If you erase the cornflower blue part, and it would also help if you erase the period, because there's this handy programmer feature, IntelliSense. So if you say color and then you press the period key, press the period key, then you'll get all the possible colors you could say. So cornflower blue is in there somewhere. I'm gonna do maybe green yellow. And this is your game, so you can do whatever you want. And if we run it again, then this is what we get. Yay. So let's do something more interesting. So we want some content in the game. And we're going to start with sprites, which are basically 2D images that we're going to put in the game. So my software of choice, I'll put this in the description as well, for image manipulation and image creation is GIMP. Well, actually it's Photoshop, but I can't afford that right now. So it's kind of like Microsoft Paint. If you want to use Microsoft Paint, go for it. But I'm going to use GIMP. So I'm going to go File, New. And I'm going to create a new image that is 512 width, 512 height. But it doesn't really matter what the width and height are. So don't worry about that too much. Okay. I'm going to make the background invisible so that we get the checkerboard by clicking this little I button on the left. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll just keep the name layer, and I'm going to have the background transparent. If you use Microsoft Paint, you're not going to be able to do this, but it's okay. Just means that you'll have a square image in your game. So I selected the circle select tool, and I'm holding shift to constrain the circle to be a perfect circle, and I'm going to release the mouse button. There we go. So I'm going to change the paint color to yellow. I'm going to select the paint bucket tool and click right there. And bam! Okay, then go select none, or you could use Control-Shift-A, which is what I normally do. I'm just being overly clear here. Okay, then I'm going to change this back to black by clicking this little icon here. I'm just creating a smiley face. Actually, I'll use the pencil tool, probably easier. Then make sure this window is active, because I want to change the size of it. And the way I'm doing this is I'm actually using the square bracket keys to raise and lower the size of the pencil. And I'm just gonna click, click, yay, and then smiley. Pretty simple. And then we go to File, Export. It's important that we export it because we need a file format like a .png, which we can actually read. So what I recommend you do is outside of your repository, so basically the folder with all of the Git stuff in it, I'm going to create another folder called Content Workspace. So this folder is outside of your repository, meaning it won't go on GitHub. And that'll be helpful for larger files. So larger files are things like movies or pictures or sound. And you don't necessarily want this in your game. So we're just going to call it smiley.png and say export. And I'll clarify where this is in a second. So this is your repository folder with the .git and the .git attributes and .git ignore and all that stuff. One folder up is where I put the content workspace. So the content workspace is not in the repository. So in content workspace, I just exported this smiley.png. Okay. And the benefit of having an outside content workspace is now we could actually save as a GIMP.xcf if we wanted to. Come back to this later with all our layers and stuff, so we don't lose any information about that. So I'm going to go back here and go to Content Workspace. So now in our Content Workspace folder, we have the smiley.png and we have the smiley.xcf, which is specific to GIMP. If you're using Photoshop, it would be a PSD. And if you're Paint, well, there's no point in doing that at all. Okay. So next thing you want to do is you want to open something that you installed, which is Monogame Pipeline. So open that up. It's a program that was installed with Monogame. You want to go up to File, Open, and you want to find where your content is. So where that is in your repository. So here's my repository. Into your project folder. In again. And then your content. And there it is. It's the content.mgcb. So open that. And it should be blank. Alright, you can just right click on this little content thing and say add existing item. Then navigate to your PNG image, your smiley.png, and you click open. And yes, copy the file to the directories. Actually preferred because we're on a Git repo. Alright, then you go up to File and Save. Don't forget to do this. Otherwise, it won't register that you added the smiley. Okay, so next up, we go back to Visual Studio. And what we want to do is in our game1.cs file, we want to add what's called a texture 2D. So texture 2D is essentially an image. That's all it is. So we're going to call this smiley, and why not say image for clarity, so you know what it is. And this is just in our class for game 1, which is essentially our game object. So that makes sense, right? Put an image in our game object. Then scroll down to the load content function, because this is where we want to actually load that image. And the way we do that is we say smiley image space. I like to put space. You don't have to though. Equals space, and then capital C content dot load, and then a less than sign, and it's of type texture 2D. So we type that, greater than sign, left parenthesis, double quote, and then the name of your image without the .png at the end. So in my repository, well, not in my repository, but the image's name is smiley.png. So we put the same thing here, except without the .png. Alright, and the last thing you need to do is close the double quote, put a right parenthesis, and semicolon. So this is what it looks like, and that's how you load the image. Alright. So So the next thing you want to do is create a position for your image. So the way we represent positions in Monogame are with a type called vector2. So you put vector2 along with your texture 2D, and we're going to call it a smiley position. So a vector2 is, for the purposes of Monogame, are just an X and a Y variable that you can change at any time. So for screen coordinates, you would use an X and a Y. Hence, you would use a vector2 for the position. Alright. In our initialize function, you'll notice I am deleting these comments. That's all they are. They don't actually do anything. If you put a double slash, that's just a comment, and so if you want to make notes while you're doing this, you can do that in the code. So actually, let's do that for smiley image in our load content. So we can just put double slash loads the smiley.png into the smiley image variable, and that's what it does. Here in the initialize, we'll create another comment that says set the starting position. So here we'll just say smiley position. Actually, I do want to give you a tip with using Visual Studio IntelliSense. When you start typing smiley, all of a sudden it says, do you mean smiley image or smiley position? There's two things you could say. So you can actually use the arrow keys to go down to smiley position and then hit the tab key, and bam, it'll insert it. Alright, so smiley position space equals space, and we'll say new vector2, which creates a new vector2, and if we arrow key up and down, we can see the different things we could put in the parentheses. So we actually want to initialize it as 0.0f comma 0.0f close parenthesis semicolon. So that says the smiley position is now equal to a vector2 with x and y values of 0. This can be replaced though if we want to. I'll just comment this out with something a little easier to type. Cleaner code. So smiley position equals vector2 dot 0, which is essentially the exact same code, just cleanly written, which I like. Cleanly written code is a very good thing. It is nice to come back to cleanly written code. Okay, so we have a smiley position. Next, what we want to do is we want to draw the sprite. at that position. So if we go down to our draw function, we'll create a comment. Draw our sprite is what we'll say. Now before we can draw our sprite, we have to let the sprite batch know that it needs to begin. And this is just something for Monogame. Monogame needs to know this. So all you have to do is write sprite batch dot begin, left right parenthesis semicolon. Likewise, we also have to tell it to end. So I'm going to jump down 2 lines and say sprite batch dot end, left parenthesis right parenthesis semicolon. Then in between the begin and end, here's where we want to add our draw. So sprite batch dot draw, and there's lots of ways we can do it. So if you arrow key up and down when you type the left parenthesis, you'll see these are all the variations of stuff we could put in the parentheses, also known as overloaded functions. So we're going to use the second one. And so the first parameter expects a texture. So remember we loaded our image into this texture, smiley image. So we're going to say smiley image as our first parameter. Then we're going to put comma position. Well, we create a position as well. So smiley position, comma, and lastly, the color. Now, 99.9% of the time, this will be color dot white, and right parenthesis semicolon. If you change the color from white, then it would no longer appear to be exactly the same as the original image. Instead, it would be a sort of tinted version of that. Okay, so if we run this right now, here's what we'll see. We'll see whatever background color we cleared to, and we'll see our image in there. Cool. But that's no game. At least not yet. So what we want to do is change the position of the sprite based on arrow key presses. So the way you do that is you go to your update function. So the comment at the top of the update function says, allows the game to run logic such as updating the world, checking for collisions, gathering input, and playing audio. Well, we need to gather the input, and we need to update the world. So that goes in update. So what we'll do let me think about how we're going to do this exactly. Alright, so we're going to say keyboard state. We're going to create a new variable, and we'll just call it state, because why not? and we're going to set it equal to keyboard dot get state, and we're just going to leave it like that. Next up, we'll create an if statement. So we'll say if, and then create parentheses, if state dot is key down, and then keys dot down, and then we'll create curly brackets like so. So here's what you should have. If you're new to programming, you might be freaking out at this point, or maybe you were freaking out 5 minutes ago. But don't worry. Once you do this about 50 times, you'll be A-okay. You'll understand what's going on. But here, essentially what we're doing is we're saying we want the keyboard state, and we're going to put it in a state variable. So just like a number variable, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a keyboard state, which stores things about what keys are being pressed. And in this if statement, we're checking if we have the down arrow key pressed at this moment in time. And if we do have the down arrow key pressed, then we will go in between these curly brackets right here. So if we are in these curly brackets, then what we'll want to do is move the position down. And the way you do that is we talk to our smiley position variable. We say dot y equals smiley position dot y plus 1. Or 1.0 f. So if we do this, here's what will happen. It'll move down. However, the rate at which it will move down will be dependent on your own computer's processor speed, basically, the clock speed on your processor. But there's also a set frame rate in Monogame. So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is this is kind of bad code to write, because it is frame rate dependent, meaning we don't know how many times this update will be called. It could be at 60 frames per second, it could be at 30 frames per second, it could be at 5 frames per second if we've got really bad performance. Which means that this will happen either 60 times a second, 30 times a second. You get what I'm saying here, right? This is not the best code to write. So what we want to do is make it dependent on time. So the way we do it is I know it's kind of redundant to multiply something by 1, but if we wanted to change that, we could. So if we use the asterisk key here, that means multiply. And we could say game time dot elapsed game time, which means the amount of time that has elapsed between last frame and this time. Dot total seconds. So that's our units. However, this will all be outlined in red. The reason that is because this is a double variable, whereas the rest of this is a float. So we can cast from a double to a float, like so. Just put float in parentheses in front of this, and it will cast it. So, if we run it now, and we hit the down key, it'll look like pretty much nothing's happening. But if you lean in really, really close and look at it, you'll see it actually is moving down, just at slug rate, pretty much. So, what you want to do is maybe instead of 1 times the elapsed time, make it 1,000 times. And if you're a science nut, then you'll know that this means we want to move 1,000 pixels per second. Which is actually pretty fast. So if you wanted to make it slower, you could. Alright, so that's all well and good, but we should add the other keys in here as well. So we do it the exact same way. If state.isKey up keys.up. Oh shoot. It's actually isKeys down. We don't want to test when the key goes up. So isKey down, keys.up. It's a little confusing, but it means the up arrow key is down. So yes. And we'll do the exact same thing. Smiley position dot y equals smiley position dot y minus 1000.0f times float game time, elapsed game time, total seconds, semicolon. Just like that. But you'll notice this is kind of repetitive. There's shortcuts in here, and I'm just going to keep adding shortcuts. You might not digest it the first time, but by the 1000th time you've seen it, you will digest this. So, first off, smiley position.y equals smiley position.y plus can actually be shortened to plus equals. Just like that. It's programmer shorthand because we use that a lot. I'm going to undo this though so that we can see the original and contrast it with the new. So these are the exact same code. Pretty much. And just like there's a plus equals, there's also a minus equals. So we'll comment that out. Smiley position dot y minus equals 1000.0f times float float cast game time elapsed game time dot total seconds. Just like that. Alright, if we run this, if you hit up, it'll go up. If you hit down, it'll go down. Alright. We can shorten this even more if we want to. So, it's kind of annoying to write out float game time dot elapsed game time dot total seconds. So what we can do is create a float variable, and we'll just call it time. We keep in mind though, we already have a variable called game time. So as long as the name doesn't conflict with game time, we're okay. So we'll just call it time. So float time equals game time dot elapsed game time dot total seconds. Just like we wrote here, except we're stashing it in this variable called time. So now what we can do is replace it with time, which makes things very easy. Okay, cool. Now, we wrote 1,000 twice. We could create a float called speed, which we'll just do it here. And say that's equal to 1,000. Then we could replace this with speed. See what I'm doing here? I'm just boiling this down to the simplest expressions. Okay, well both of these are speed times time, so we could create another variable. And we'll call this move amount equals speed times time. Alright, cool. You wouldn't want to do that though if you wanted it to move down faster than it moves up. But I think I want everything to move the same speed, so we'll just keep it like that. Now let's add the same thing. Probably do this on your own at this point, just using the pattern I've given you. Let's do this for the other piece. So state dot is key down, keys dot left, smiley position dot x minus equals move amount. Note that I said dot x instead of dot y. Oh, and not smiley image either. I made a mistake. Smiley position. Okay. Then if state dot is keyed down, keys dot right. Smiley position dot x plus equals move amount. Just like that. Okay, so if we run it now, we can move the smiley face anywhere we want. Okay, that is all for this tutorial. So, what are we going to do? We're going to make a commit and put this on our server. So we go to a repository in Windows Explorer, we right click, we go git commit to master, we write a commit message, that message will be made smiley face respond to arrow keys. Okay, and be careful here because we did add the PNG to the content pipeline, so that's important that we check that and make sure that gets committed as well. Now, I have commit and push selected again. If you wanted to just make this commit but not put it on the GitHub server, you would just say commit. But I want to commit and push. So, bam. Again, username for your GitHub and your password. And success. Close. Now if we go to our repository on the internets, and we dig in a little bit, and we go to our game1.cs, you'll see it now reflects everything we did here. Additionally, if you go back to the top and you click your commits history, you'll see that we just made this commit, which is made smiley face respond to arrow keys. So click that, and you'll see the changes we made. So we did change the content pipeline indirectly through the use of this content pipeline tool. We did add this image to it. And here we can see all of the changes we made from our original game1.cs to now. So I deleted some comments, it looks like, but mostly added stuff. So all the red stuff is no longer there. All the green stuff is new. And if you had a buddy, you could, well, your buddy could leave a comment here saying, yes, I liked this change, or no, I didn't like this change. Or here's what you could do to improve this. Things like that. Like I said, it's like a Dropbox or Google Drive, but on steroids. Okay. So that is really all for this tutorial. However, I did want to explain to you how you can get help. So, obviously you could Google it. If you have a specific question, like, how do I comment in C#, then you could Google that. I'm sure you are well aware of how to do that. Another way to get help would be to look at the code I wrote. And the way you can do that is go to my GitHub repository, which is right here, and I'll include that link in the description. And you can take a look at that all you want. Another way you could get help is ask me a question on my Twitch stream, which I've been doing more and more recently. If I do eventually get to a point where I have a committed schedule on Twitch stream, then you'll see my schedule posted on Twitch stream. Yeah, and that's probably, the easiest way. If you have a simple question, just ask me a question. Simple as that. And lastly, I'm going to give you my email address, which is patrick@fridaygamestudios.com. So only use that email address if you have maybe a bigger question. Specifically, I am opening my doors now to do consultations. So I will charge a consultation fee if I choose to answer your question. And the way we'll do that is you send me an email with the subject title line consultation request. Then in that email, you tell me kind of what the consultation is about, so I can make the judgment of whether or not I can actually answer your question adequately, worth your money. I'm not going to answer your question if I don't think it's worth your money, or if it's a very simple question, I'll just answer it right then and there with no charge. But if you have a pretty big question and you want someone to kind of help you through it and walk you through some steps or whatever it is, then I will reply back with further instructions, and we'll have a one-on-one sit down over maybe Skype or something like that, and we'll just have a ball. We'll just hang out together and we'll do awesome stuff together for maybe like an hour. And the consultation fee for that would be $20. So yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. And I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.